Hello there and welcome back to Laurence Plays for part 2 of the Lignumis related updates. So in the last video I had a bit of a look at where we were getting our resources from. We touched on the stone and the peat that are coming from up here and the wood and the gold that are being produced down here. I did realise after I made the video that I forgot to mention that the gold can only be grown on this sort of special type of slightly golden territory. So you'll notice that particularly over here, even though this growing tower is covering these squares up here as well, there's no gold stromatolites growing there because they have to grow on this sort of slightly funny territory. That's something I sort of took for granted from previous space age explorations, but forgot to mention in the video. So I'm catching up on that now. And so yeah, these ones down here these four would get very good coverage. This one would get about 50% coverage, and this one would be almost useless. So we probably don't want to put that one in, even if we had the resources to do so. So, yes, anyway, that's talked about all of that. The next thing I wanted to talk about was what we're going to do with all of those resources we've gathered. So over here we've got the peat and the wood and the stone bricks and the gold all coming in onto a standard main bus type design. I put in the lumber mills towards the end of the stream, and these are producing the lumber from the wood at a much faster rate. And we've got the lovely leech mod running over here. So these inserters are taking the fuel and the wood from the belt, putting it into here, and then these inserters are able to take fuel from inside here to power themselves. So they're pulling out the peat as well to keep themselves running, and that's allowing them to carry on ticking over. However, we suspect that this mod might be causing some slowdown and some lag issues. There's a couple of possible causes of it, we're not sure about it, but we think that might be one of them, so we may be end up disabling this after we leave the planet. Anyway, let's move on. On Lignumis, you're essentially having an additional wooden phase put in at the beginning of the game. So all of these buildings are burner powered. So we've got burner inserters, burner assembly machines, burner labs, burner lumber mills, burner everything. Everything is running off burning fuel in order to power itself. And additionally, if that wasn't painful enough, all of the belts are wooden belts, and you can see over there on the right, this is a 7.5 items a second, and the underground belts go a maximum of 3 squares underground. Well, it claims to be a length of 4, but it goes under 3 squares and then before it comes back up again in the 4th one. So this is slightly less than we're used to with yellow belts, and so this has made everything a little bit harder over on Lignumis. Although, that said, the amount of resource you require, that means that the throughput isn't all that high. Yes, we've got 2 belts of wood coming in, but that's the only place where a single belt hasn't really been enough. And maybe on the inputs to the brick cooking up there. But in general, it's been absolutely fine because the resource requirements are fairly low, so the slower speed of belts hasn't been a problem. On a similar note, we also have wooden ammunition. So in here we've got these are wooden dart magazines. So they fire out, well, they do even less damage than normal bullets. As you can see up here, it reduces your shooting speed to, I'm assuming that's a times 75%, not by 75%, because it doesn't seem that slow. But we're doing a 3.6 damage there, and that's even after an upgrade from science somewhere, compared to the 6 damage that you do from yellow ammunition. So it's about half the effectiveness of yellow ammunition. It fires a bit more slowly, but it is only made of wood, so it's really cheap. And of course, to go with the general wood theme that's going on this planet, we also have a wooden science pack. So this is made from wooden gears, which are made in an assembly machine here, and stone bricks. The wooden gears are actually made really quickly. As you can see up there in the top right, we're making these at 1 per second, even though it's a crafting machine that runs at a quarter speed. Then up here, we're taking them in at 0.05 per second. So we could actually run 20 assembly machines off making the science packs off a single one of these gear machines. And that's why I've set it up as I have down here, with one machine at the bottom making the gears, and then squeezing them onto a belt along here and then passing everything up. Now, I've just noticed that there's a problem here, and that there's no peat going up this belt here. So these inserters will eventually run out of fuel. However, it appears that the demand on them has been sufficiently low that they've actually been okay. Despite having them running for the entire time we've been on Lignumis, it's been absolutely fine. What I actually need to do in order to get this to work is to put in a splitter there, I suppose, and then a belt coming through under here like this, and then run that one that way, do that and that and that, and then tidy up all of these bricks from the inside of the belt up here, and then this will start working for forever. And in fact, because these are going to take from the near side of the belt, that may well be enough of a fix. These inserters will pull the bricks through, the peat will find its way up, and then by the time that these start to actually run out of fuel, actually that one's really low on fuel, I was hoping that by the time these started to run out of fuel, then maybe it would be okay. And whilst the fuel in them does last quite a long time, by sort of making this one, forcing this one to run for a little while, it has now in fact, oh no, that's interesting. It grabbed fuel from, I'm not even quite sure how that fixed itself, but it managed to get a little bit of power. I think it grabbed some fuel off this belt here. That's very strange. I was honestly not expecting that. So I don't know exactly how that works, but it does seem to. So apparently the leech mod allows inserters to just sort of get fuel out of nowhere. That's quite interesting, and I'm rather surprised. Anyway, that's been a massive sidetrack. The point I was trying to make here is that we are making a large quantity of the wooden science over here. That's being fed onto a belt, coming around here where we are mixing it onto a belt with some peat here so we can power these inserters, and then putting it into these burner labs over here, which produce the science. The next thing was, well, after that, we then had an early recipe for basic circuits, and there are a couple of ways to make these in the current mod set. So we've got the basic circuit board here, which is made out of lumber and gold cable. So the lumber is coming from the wood, as we've discussed previously, and the gold cable is made in an assembly machine out of gold plate, so that's nice and easy. But there's also this alternative recipe, which is lumber and copper cable, and so I suspect that's going to be very useful once we get down onto Norvis and start having to make these things out of resources that you can find down on that planet. So it's good to know that we won't be sort of forced to stop making these things. We will still be able to carry on should we feel the need to make these very, very basic circuits. The good news is that you don't actually need the basic circuits to make the normal green circuits, so it's not as if we'd have to, it's not as if that's a telescopic recipe, even if you no doubt need the greens to make the reds and the reds to make the blues. But at least you don't need the browns to make all of those, so that's quite a relief actually. Otherwise we'd have to grow enormous amounts of trees everywhere in order to just keep that running. But over here we have a simple system. This was set up by Mike, I believe, making the circuit boards in order to make the splitters and to make all the various belt things and the various inserters up here as well. So we can keep the basic infrastructure. Yes, we've started to have a bit of a mall growing on this planet. Now this is just going into wooden boxes, continuing the wooden theme, because we don't have robot ports on here, so there's no logistics apart from what we can do ourselves. But you know, it kind of basically works. It means when you need some more inserters, you can come over here and grab them rather than having to handcraft absolutely everything. There was a lot of handcrafting on this planet. He also made gold pipes, which are presumably a lot like iron pipes, but a bit softer and quite a lot more expensive, and that was required for the next step. And this is the next step, the steam science. So as far as I can tell, we're basically just filling a jar up with some steam, but we have to make the jar out of gold and then it turns into a glass one. I don't know, it's a computer game. So this recipe is literally just gold plates, but it has to be done specifically in a steam assembly machine. So that's a variation on the normal assembly machine. It's very, very similar, but you just need to add some gold pipes into it to make it. So that we're using the steam that I mentioned in the last video that we're making from the moist stromatolite residue, whatever it was called. That sort of stuff. We're making we've got loads and loads of steam in these tanks down here. That's brought up in the pipes over to here where it runs these machines, and that allows us to make steam science, which goes off down the belt and into the other side of the labs over here. Now that was very, very straightforward. I mean, okay, yes, we had to use a different assembly machine and bring steam over. But that wasn't a problem. The only problem I had with this was was powering the inserters that unload the steam science from these machines. As you can see, they are because we can't use the leaching because there's no fuel in this machine. There's no fuel for them to leach. Over here, for example, there's peat in here, so that peat can be taken out by this inserter in order to fuel itself. I'm not sure why these inserters have carried on running. Maybe they have, yeah, but for some reason they do seem to have mostly worked. They may be finding peat somewhere. Maybe they can pick it up from the output as well. But over here, there is no peat at all available for these inserters. And so I've got these long inserters over here that are picking up peat from this belt and putting it all the way over into these ones. And that felt absolutely ridiculous. But, you know, it worked. It looks weird, it looks kind of stupid, but it did work, so I'm not going to complain about it too much. This did allow us to then fuel the inserters to pass the steam science over to the science labs over here. And that's it for science on this planet. There are only 2 science packs, and they're both quite simple. But then, with this being an extended burner phase and a very, very simple starter planet, it makes sense that everything was quite straightforward. Since then, Mike continued extending the bus, so we've got an expanded circuit production system over here, which is feeding circuits off in both directions, because we thought we were going to need a few more of them than we did. And actually, to be fair, we did need quite a lot from these machines. You can see along here that we've made over 1,000 in this machine, and okay, most of the others have only made a few hundred, but quite a lot has been made. And I imagine that discrepancy is probably because, as you can see over here, the gold is still not being produced particularly quickly. So these machines down at the bottom are snaffling pretty much all of the gold in order to allow at least they were when there was a shortage of the circuits, so that meant that this first machine probably did most of the construction. And that's why this one's at about 1100, this one's at 300, and then it drops off very, very quickly as we go further up. We also, in and out of a sense of completeness, I got Mike to, because I didn't know how long we were going to be here for, I got him to build up some assembly machine and some steam assembly machines and some grow towers over here. All of those are now being made, so there actually are plenty of the agricultural towers, so Tristan could finish off his gold farm if he wanted to. I don't think he needs to, because we have kind of finished this planet, but the capability is there if necessary. He also built up these ridiculous little radar things that are made entirely largely out of wood. So we've got some circuit boards and some gold plates in there, and then some wooden gears and some stone bricks. So Mike was having absolute hysterics over the idea that we've made a radar out of wood, but Tristan in particular was trying to point out to him that there were some circuit boards in there, which meant there was at least a little bit of metal. Maybe the wooden gears and the bricks are to give it some structure and to allow it to rotate gently, like this one actually isn't doing at the moment, but it looks like it probably should. And so once he'd made a load of those, we then dispatched Sophia around to put these radars down in basically every area. And their coverage is, well, let's just say it's not enormous. If you look over there on the mini-map, you can see I'm waving it around. That's a 3x3 coverage area in terms of chunks. That's not very big. And if I put one in, yeah, they are also peat powered. So that means unless we put in the infrastructure to keep them fueled, they're eventually going to run out of power and just stop working. So that's a little bit pathetic. However, Sophia did run around and put them in to give us complete coverage of our factory area, which I think is going to be quite useful. It's going to mean for at least for a little while, we're going to be able to glance back up at this factory and find out if anything has happened to it and see what's going on. I think we probably won't bother to fuel them, but in theory we could. We've also got production over here of gun turrets and wooden walls, so we've got the wooden fences, perhaps I should call them. Apparently they reduce noise level. I did a little bit of testing with these between streams, and I couldn't see much of a difference, but apparently they do, so maybe we'll put a ring of wall around the place before we leave. And I think we'll also put in a number of turrets, of which we've so far made a grand total of 6, because we have a shocking shortage of gold, especially up here where it's all getting schnaffled in order to make pipes to make agricultural towers. So it's a nice idea. It would be good to put in some turrets around the place for when we leave. Although that said, I can't imagine us ever actually wanting any of this again. Next time we come back, we're probably going to have proper mining drills, proper turrets, proper everything, and we'll be setting up mining patches on these gold things here and just absolutely ripping through any of the little wriggly guys who turn up. So I think we probably don't care about expanding this planet or maintaining what we've got on this planet, because if we do come back here, we'll build something better out of just whatever resources we can scrape off the bottom of a shoe or something, probably. We've also got a little area over here making stone furnaces. That was to try and export them over off onto to Norvis to make things a little bit safer down there. And that brings me on to what's possibly been our favourite item that we've made in this run, and that is the wooden rocket silo, or provisional rocket silo as it's apparently actually called. And these are how you escape Lignumis and you get down to Norvis, and in order to carry on with basically get started on the game as normal. And building it was actually quite expensive. I dropped in an assembly machine here in order to get it done, because I didn't want to try and gather all this stuff up in my inventory and then build it manually. But as you can see, that requires a lot of gold, a lot of lumber, a lot of gears, a lot of circuit boards, a lot of stone. It was an expensive thing to build, especially as we're considering building 3 of these so that we could all launch ourselves in quick succession, because we've got 5 players and a silo can build 1 rocket and then build 1 more rocket and have it sort of in stock, as it were. So we thought, okay, if we have 3 of these, then we can build 6 rockets up, and all 5 of us will be able to leave in pretty quick succession, just so we can get out of here and get onto Norvis, just in case we need backup. However, it was so expensive, we decided not to do that, because it was just taking forever to get enough gold through. So I dropped in the silo up here and then started going, okay, well, we need something to fuel that, and apparently that's fueled with wood juice, or well, actually it's called wooden pulp. So you take in wood, you take in fuel, you take in steam, put it in a steam assembly machine, and that can pulp the wood. Fair enough, that's fairly sensible. Then from there, well, it's not really used for anything. I put in this T-junction down here and then went, oh, actually, we're not going to use this anywhere except for feeding into the rocket silo, where we then needed to make a quantity of provisional rocket parts. I can't remember how many of these we needed to make an actual rocket, but as you can see, that takes more gold and lumber and gears and wood and circuit boards and wood pulp. So that was a fairly major process. Again, it's a big drain on the gold supplies, but we were able to finally make a rocket. And these rockets are quite interesting. It's got the standard space age thing of you can't take your inventory with you. So if I try and get into here and escape to Norvis, I can't, because my personal inventory must be empty. But if I put down some boxes and empty my inventory in them in the standard way, then I can go even with ammunition in my guns down here, which is a slightly different thing. And also, there's all this storage space in the rocket itself, so you can actually take a steel chest's worth of stuff with you, which is again is quite generous and means you can do a sort of reasonably good start over on Norvis. And I think that's probably a good thing, because you can't actually launch these rockets just with stock in them. They have to fly a player and a load of stuff, and so you need to think a little bit about what you want to take with you, because you're going to land on Norvis and you're going to have to start from scratch minus whatever you think of taking with you. Fortunately, with us playing multiplayer, we were able to send Mark over initially and then have him go, oh no, it's very bitery, please send more stuff. So I guess we'll be sending some more stuff over with the rest of us. But we did our best. We put a load of stuff in there, the sort of things you might need, like inserters and belts and all that sort of stuff. In fact, let's put all of that stuff in. You know, most of that looks useful as well, and probably a lot of that as well. Let's just chuck all this in here and go, okay, well, I can't quite take everything, but that'll do. Then you hit the escape to Norvis button, and well, it's scripted rather than being done as a proper rocket launch, so I'm still able to run around a little bit. However, I'll be grabbed by it fairly quickly when it actually launches. Wooden rockets, it turns out, take off quite slowly. I guess it's a bit like firework. They're usually made out of a cardboard tube or something, so I guess that makes them about as close to a wooden rocket as anything I can imagine. Or actually, I've seen, I think it's xylofoxylin keeps making rockets out of wood, and also carbon fibre and epoxy resin and stuff like that. But you know, there's a lot of wood in there in general. I hope this is going to take me with... Ah, there we go. Right, so I've been teleported down onto Norvis. We've got the crashed spaceship here, which Mark crashed. He got the pretty animation when he landed there. He's put down some turrets because he realised very quickly that whilst this is quite a nice starting area because we've got the iron and the copper and the coal and the stone, we've also got quite a lot of biters. And yes, these are small biters, but we've only got pistols and wooden ammunition at the moment. So fortunately, he's put down some turrets here. So let's go over and aggro them a little bit, see what happens. Hey guys, run away! Let's hit them with the wooden darts. And there we go. Okay, so the wooden darts do make quite quick work of the small biters. So as long as we bring some turrets with us, we're probably going to be okay. Yeah, I can kill these guys. Taking out the spawner is going to be a little bit tricky. Fortunately, there's 5 of us, so we've got 5 times the damage output, or possibly 4 people to shoot the... Oh, I've run out. No, I haven't. I was reloading. Or 4 people to shoot the spawner and 1 person to kite the biters around or shoot them. So I think we are going to be okay, but it is going to be a little bit more of a challenge than a normal sort of getting started on Norvis is, where you get that lovely safe area where there aren't any biters, just to, to get yourself started. So it's going to be a little bit interesting down here, but I think we'll probably be okay. Before we move on from Lignumis, I should probably draw your attention to this lovely wall and museum piece Sophia put up around our original crash spaceship. It's got a lovely wooden wall and some basic gun turrets, just to make sure the biters never destroy our lovely spaceship here. And oh, they are completely full of ammunition as well, so he's been very, very generous. He's also done a lot of carpeting of the base area with stone, which is, I mean, I certainly didn't have a problem with this for once, because we had so much stone brick available. He set up such an efficient production system over here that we have loads and loads of stone, so to be honest, carpeting the whole area, not really a problem. I'm kind of okay with that for once. I should also mention that he did say in the comments from the video that the reason he's put the mining drills in different orientations like this is to get them to insert onto both sides of the belt. So this means that he's getting full coverage on the belt. You can see up here, this one is outputting onto the starboard side, and then this one is outputting onto the port side. So we're getting full coverage on the belt. We're getting a nice full belts of stone coming out, which doesn't really matter right now, but did mean we're getting the maximum throughput we could back when it did matter. So I've touched on our feelings about Lignumis a bit as we're going through, but I want to go into them in a little bit more detail and just make sure I haven't missed anything out. So my first thought was that Lignumis is taking the early game burner phase from normal Factorio, but it's sort of extending it and making it a lot more interesting. The burner phase, not traditionally, has been something where you go, oh, for goodness sake, let me get me out of this as quickly as possible. I want to have electricity up and running. I just want to get past it and start playing the game properly. But this has added enough extra depth to it, a bit like Industrial Revolution does with its early burner phase and then steam phase, that it's actually been quite interesting and fun to play through, and has put in some additional challenges, like little things like having to get the fuel into these inserters over here. And we had another abomination over here where we've got these 2 inserters with 4 things coming up to them. Now, yes, I could have split them all off onto separate belts and put them and had peat going in as well, but I didn't think of it because I'm a bit of a muppet. So I then put in this inserter to load this one with fuel from here, and then was going, oh, how am I going to get into this one? And Mike came along and put in an additional inserter for inserting the wooden gears, and then another inserter there to grab the fuel from there and pass it over to here, which is an absolute abomination. But, you know, it works, and coming up with slightly weird and convoluted systems to do that is kind of half the fun. So we've got this inserter is powering this machine here by pulling up the peat from here, and then from here it's being taken into these 2 inserters, from where it's being taken into these 2, and then into these 2. So the whole area, and somehow into this one as well, that's probably from this machine as well. So all of this stuff is being powered from this single inserter here, which is quite an achievement and a little bit messy. But you know what? That's how it goes. It's kind of fun. And because there's 2 different science packs to make up here, you've got the encouragement to actually go in and do it properly and set up proper systems. We've got a bus system and production running off there, even if it's all using the burner systems, because you actually can, and it's worthwhile. Whereas in traditionally on Norvis, yeah, you just drop down in your first assembly, you get power to it as quickly as you can, and you go, okay, well, this is going to be just my bootstrap base, and all the burner stuff I'll be getting rid of as soon as I possibly can. Here we've got actual buses running off the burner gear, which you'd never do in normal play, and I think that's been quite fun. I mentioned last time that I also really enjoyed the noise pollution idea. It hasn't been enormously different from the standard pollution from the way we've run into it. Although putting in that might be because we haven't put in the walls. We'll give that a try before we leave. But it has certainly felt different, and it's a very nice idea as well. And I think the fact that presumably means the size of your pollution cloud scales very, very quickly with your production level is also very interesting. And I'm a great fan of that. Tristan, as you might remember, concentrated largely on the gold production because that was such a big job. It basically kept him busy for the entire stream while we were doing everything else. And I don't mean that as a slight. It was a huge job to try and get enough gold coming through. And his opinion was that perhaps a lot of the things might have been a bit too expensive if you've been playing it in single player. And he's got a point. A lot of the buildings are very, very expensive. The agricultural towers, for example, taking in 70 wood each, means that's quite a big deal, and especially as you need them for both wood and gold. But then perhaps if you were just one player, you've got a couple of agricultural towers up and producing the wood, and then maybe one doing gold. And while they were running and building up a bit of supply, perhaps then you'd have run off and been doing the stone and getting the peat expanded and running at a decent speed. So perhaps it wouldn't have mattered, and it would have all sort of balanced out fairly nicely. It's kind of hard to tell because we only played this with 5 players. He was also a fan of the noise mechanic and wondered if that meant that paving over everything was a bad idea because it doesn't absorb the sound. Any noise pollution we're making will just echo off the paving slabs. I don't know if that's true. More research will be required into that, but it's a nice idea, and I would like to believe it's true because these are the sort of things that would make a noise pollution mechanic its own thing and therefore a bit more interesting. In fact, if they actually made it louder because it was echoing off it, maybe that would be even more interesting. He had a slightly different philosophy on the belt speed problem as well. He noticed that it only took 5 crushers to fill one of these belts with the crushed gold, and so that's meant he's had to split this off like this, as you can see. And I think maybe that's because we're getting through the crushed gold in larger quantities. Maybe it takes multiple crushed gold to make 1 gold. I'm not sure. But he definitely ran into a problem where he was struggling with throughput, which is why he's had to do little things like this. So it sounds like he suffered a bit more from the speed of the wooden belts than the rest of us did. Sophia observed that setting up the stone mining was a bit different because you needed to power the drills. And I think, yes, you do need to power drills a little bit in fact early game Factorio in the burner phase, but by the time you're setting up large mining outposts like this, rather than just a handful that you're probably hand feeding, by that point you've got electric miners everywhere anyway. So it meant he had to come up with a new system to feed them, and that's been done quite elegantly. It's a nice neat solution with the cross hatching going on here, and the angles to feed both sides of the belt, as I mentioned. It also meant that having the 4x4 coverage area on the mining drills was quite nice because it meant things just worked and you didn't have to faff around with that too much. He also observed that the noise pollution, whilst being a nice idea, didn't really affect us all that much because we killed all the critters inside our explored area and definitely inside the noise pollution area, so we didn't really have to play with that too much. But again, maybe that would have been different solo, because it certainly is a little bit harder to deal with them on your own, because things are a bit tougher. You have a lot less damage output. You can't just bring yourself and 4 of your friends over to beat the stuff up. And now in vanilla Factorio, you often find that it balances itself out quite nicely, because if you've got more players, you tend to build quicker, so you get more pollution, so you get more biters sooner. I'm not sure if that's so much the case here, because we just finished it and now we're leaving, but potentially it could have been. It's kind of hard to say, and I know balancing is a very, very tricky part of game design. He's also suggested that perhaps we should just completely mothball the factory when we leave, so that it gets a bit quieter, and then maybe the little critters won't expand as much. Maybe they won't hear about us and they won't come over and investigate. Who knows? But eventually it will just it will grind to a halt all of its own accord, because everything will fill up. We'll just have all of the machines everywhere will be full of everything they're trying to make. We'll even have enough gold to make all of the pipes we're trying to make. I don't know. That does seem to be the limiting factor looking at the resources. But eventually it will grind to a halt all by itself. Mike really liked that digging up the peat gave you a non-fuel byproduct, because remember that wood is not burnable in this particular mod pack. So the digging up the peat had a waste resource, but it was a waste resource that was actually quite useful. So right at the beginning, there was a little bit of a faff for him where he was trying to work out what to do with the wood that was coming out, because we hadn't got the bus set up yet. But then once we got the bus set up, then we just prioritised the wood input from the peat production down here, as you can see with this splitter, and that meant that we got rid of the any wood that was overflowing from there quite easily. But it was actually then at that point quite useful, because initially we were having quite a lot of trouble getting the wood production up and running, because once again the 70 wood you need in order to make each one of these towers. He found that a lot more interesting and useful than the byproducts that cropped up in K2SE, because it was actually a bit more useful rather than just being loop it back round and stick it back into the beginning again, or put it on a spaceship and take it away because it's sand and we don't know what to do with it. He did say if he was doing this again, he'd set things up slightly differently. He wouldn't have this loop back of peat coming back up here. He'd do it probably like this, where the peat is coming out onto the belt and then it can be reinserted if the burner needs it, or the way it was done over here, where you've got the drills emptying onto the belt here, and once again it can then be passed into the mining drills if they need by these inserters if they need it. So there's a couple of tweaks that could be made, but basically the design worked, and that's the important thing. It's just it could have been made slightly neater, and you know you come back, you learn things you want to do differently, and maybe you do it differently the next time. He did say though that his reluctance to do that in the first place was because he wanted to get maximum drill density. If you look at Sophia's patch, there's quite a lot of space around the drills. Each drill I think is the only one that's mining from its own 16 square patch, whereas down here Mike has got a significantly higher density. It's still 4 across, but it's only 2 high, and that means he's getting twice as many drills in on the patch. And because in Factorio the rate that a resource comes out is sort of related to the area of the patch rather than the depth of it, it's quite important sometimes to cram as many mining drills onto a patch as you can. In this case, this stone patch is huge, so it didn't matter quite as much. But in the case of this one down here, for example, there's a lot more stone in this patch. It's 330k versus this one's 260k, although goodness knows what that was at when it was brand new. But it's about half the physical size, so you'd only be able to get half as many drills on. So that means it would come out at half the rate, but it would keep going for a lot longer before it depleted the patch. Of course, what Mike hasn't mentioned is that you could get exactly the same quantity of resource coming out if you flip this drill round like that and then move this inserter down, and put his extra piece of belt in there like that. Then he's got exactly the same amount of resource being produced. And he could then put an additional drill on the other side over here, and that would mean you'd have 2 drills in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 across. So it would be slightly denser than the setup he's got at the moment. But you know, never mind. These designs can always be tweaked, and there's always improvements available to be made. Mike also commented that everything needs to have a supply of peat or steam would probably have become tiresome after a while, and I think he's right on that. He did comment that means that this moon is basically it's the right size. We had 2 different science packs to produce that had different mechanics. We had 2 interesting new mechanics for producing resources over here, and a few extra things to play with, but it didn't outlive its welcome. It went on for about the right amount of time. So yeah, I think my congratulations go to the mod author. There's some interesting new mechanics in here, and he hasn't overdone them. It's about the right size, and we've now finished this. It was a fun sort of amuse-bouche, I suppose, before we get into the proper starter of Norvis, and then off into the main course of all of the other planets. He points out we finished it in about 4 hours with 5 people, so that's 20 man-hours, but solo you'd probably been a little bit quicker because you tend to be a bit more efficient on your own because you don't have confusion and disagreements and arguments or just trying to work out who's doing what, so you tend to be a little bit more efficient on your own. And of course we had to design everything. So all in all, I think yes, this was a good size for an introduction to the run. We built up a system over here that has worked quite nicely. It would be expandable a bit if we wanted it. We could put a few more machines here making the science packs. We could put a few more labs in at the top. If we had any more science to do, it'd be quite nice to be able to expand it like that. And speaking of the sciences, I know I've had requests in the past to go through and talk about the various different sciences that have been done during the run. So let's have a quick look. Well, we got the Moon Discovery Lignumis free at the start. We didn't actually have to produce 10 red sciences before we did that. We crash landed there, and that counts as discovering it. But from there, we were then able to develop a wood science pack by getting a tree and cutting it in half. And from there, we could invent wooden gun turrets, wooden burner automation, which got us the assembly machine and the long-handled inserter. It was I'm very happy that we had these burner long inserters. They were very, very useful. We wouldn't have been able to do it without them. And then from there, basic agriculture to grow trees, wooden logistics to give us the wooden belts, gold fluid handling, which is a bizarre idea. But this might mean we have fluid handling a bit earlier than we would otherwise when we get down to Novice. It'll be interesting to see whether that's the case. And once we got that, we're then able to unlock the Steam science packs. We got basic repair packs, landfill, so we didn't actually use any landfill, but we could have done. Maybe we should take some of that down to Novice with us, but I think we'll have stone pretty damn quickly down there. And so that's got us landfill a lot earlier than you normally would in the game, so that could be quite useful. We got the sort of the pathetic basic radars, and then we got wood liquefaction, which is for the rocket fuel. We've technically apparently researched automation science packs. I'm not quite sure how, given we haven't got the prereqs for it, but apparently we have. We've got ore crushing, so that's from one of the mods, and that gets us that extra boost in productivity. We discovered Novice, so well done there. I guess we just sort of looked up in the sky and went, what's that big thing hanging up there? And then we did a worker robot speed upgrade. We've got basic construction bots. Those were kind of pathetic, but that did get us basic personal robot ports and very, very basic construction robots that are made out of gold. And that complements our nanobots to an extent, I suppose, in that these won't run out, although we will keep needing to put in fuel into the portable generator. But this is going to give us actual early game construction bots without having to use up the nanobots. So that could be quite valuable. They are very, very slow though. Watch this. They're kind of slow. I want to say these guys are even slower than normal early game construction bots. So we won't be doing massive builds with them, but for the fiddly stuff, like getting all the inserters in the right place in a furnace stack, this sort of level of bot is actually it's enough. It stops you having to go through and do all the individual clickings by hand, and you can put down the long belts quickly yourself. But having the bots to do the little fiddly bits of putting in the inserters exactly where you want them when you do a copy paste, I think that's going to be useful and is going to be worth having. Then that brings us on to the last few researches over on Lignumis. We got a projectile and weapon shooting speed upgrades. We got the lumber mill. That was the fast machine that was producing the lumber 8 times faster. We did an ore crushing productivity as well, lovely. And then we invented provisional rockets, which is, as it says, our only chance to get off the moon. Right, so that is everything we did on Lignumis. We had this lovely tech tree, starting with the wood science pack. We've worked our way through it, and then you get into sort of the real main part of Factorio down here, which we'll go and play with in the next stream, and that will be Monday at 7:30 PM UK time. Although you'll probably have seen that stream before this video comes out. That said, there will be another stream on Monday at 7:30 PM UK time, so please come along to that. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss out on any of those videos. I'll come along to the Wednesday night streams for where I'll be playing the last Starship, and yeah, keep an eye out for more videos coming out on Fridays. Thank you very much for watching. I hope you've enjoyed the video, and I'll see you next time. Bye bye.